We're here today with County Supervisor Dr. Roger Weiner. We're going to talk about some of the things that are going on in the county out at the hospital. Good morning, Dr. Weiner. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon to you too.
First of all, I wanted to ask you, we're in your new office, and you've moved out here and are kind of rebranding your practice a little bit. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
With the Affordable Care Act of 2012, it was obvious to me that there's a paradigm shift going on, that the federal government wants healthcare to be moved from the hospital setting as much as possible to the outpatient setting. My practice was your classic cardiovascular practice with a little bit of internal medicine and a relatively small office, a specialty practice. And with the handwriting on the wall and with the obvious loss of primary care that we were getting in the area, I decided to be one step ahead of the curve and develop an urgent care center that also provides cardiovascular services, comprehensive cardiovascular service that we've always done, but add family practice, internal medicine, and an after-hours clinic all in one shop, so to speak.
Okay. So are you already operating as an after-hours?
Not yet,
Okay.
no. We hope to, by year's end, we hope to be fully operational. It was a huge project, a very expensive project, to go from a small cardiovascular practice to meet all the requirements of an urgent care center and to have all the advanced devices we want to have in here, in addition to what we were doing before in advanced cardiovascular disease, is an awesome task and a very expensive task.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, as a supervisor and a doctor, you've got a unique kind of perspective on, particularly the healthcare industry, but a lot of things about the community. I want to talk a little bit about the hospital.
Sure.
You've been a very outspoken critic of the way things are going over there. Why don't you just give us kind of your take on what's wrong over at the hospital and what we can do to fix it?
Well, I think to understand what's wrong with the hospital, you have to have like most things, a historic perspective. This was a county hospital, still is in fact a county hospital. A lot of folks don't realize it. The county still owns the hospital. The county, in fact, is still the landlord and owner of the hospital. A company called Health Management Associates in around 1996 or 97 was retained or hired, whatever term you want to use, to take over the management responsibilities of the hospital. That happened for several reasons, and that was before I actually came to Clarksdale. So what I'm relating to you is, in this historic perspective, it's what's been related to me. At that time, the county itself, the county government, was in financial duress. The hospital was having financial difficulty, and the supervisors at that time were looking for a solution to both problems. And along came corporate America, and with that potential solution, they put up $30 million in the front end of an extended lease and took over responsibility for managing the hospital. And associated with that is a very long lease agreement that lists very specific language for what the responsibilities were. And for the first several years, I think for the most part, they fulfilled those lease responsibilities, and the government's financial problems were solved in that the county government had $30+ million in reserves in the bank and was getting a good interest return, because this was all before the 2008 financial collapse. So we were getting 5, 6, 7% return on this $30 million. So it was a win-win situation. Then came 2007, and Health Management Associates did something that almost is unprecedented in corporate America. They borrowed $3.5 billion, that's right, billion dollars.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money for any reason. It's an obscene amount of money when you understand that they did it to pay their stockholders a one-time $10 dividend. You might as well take a lighter and burn the money.
Yeah.
The payback on that back then, and I don't know what it is today, but it's still a huge amount, was about $258 million a year, just the interest on that note. It was more than they were spending on capital improvements on all 70 hospitals that they were owned or managing at that time. It was at that point I predicted that we were going to all pay a dear price for that. When we signed HMA on to manage the hospital, This community, me as an individual, the folks that use the hospital, we didn't sign on for a $3.5 billion debt. We didn't, which comes out to $50 million per hospital. So now you have a hospital that was having financial problems. We're supposed to solve those problems, and the company takes it over. Now, for all practical purposes, puts that hospital in a $50 million hole, and guess what? Capital improvements grind to a halt. Quality of care starts to deteriorate. Salaries are becoming an issue, all which I predicted back in 2007 at great personal cost, which everybody knows about, which we just won't get into today in any great detail. It's ancient history. So that's the historic perspective. They became, and they'll deny this all the time, that they were cash poor, overextended. But it all came to fruition when last year they were forced out by a hedge fund. Their board of trustees was thrown out, and another company, Community Health, came in and for all practical purposes bailed them out. But now they've inherited, what they bought is that same $3.5 billion deficit, and this hospital still has whatever residual there is of that $50 million debt. And if you ask me where that $50 million sum is coming from, it's simple arithmetic. Community Health acquired HMA's 72 hospitals. Right. Divided by 3.5 divided by 72, it comes out to about $50 million per hospital. Now, it's not fair to say that each hospital, because it isn't that much debt, right, because it varies. Some are 400-bed hospitals, some are 20-bed hospitals. But on average, each hospital is $50 million in debt thanks to the mismanagement of HMA back in 2007 when they borrowed $3.5 billion. So they'll deny it all day long, but there's an incredible shortage of capital to do the things that need to be done.
They just don't have the money to do what they want to do or need to do.
Yeah, and I don't even know why they argue about it, because it's just so obvious. Yeah. Along with it, Health Management Associates, and you can ask anybody in this community, and it's one of the driving forces why people are going elsewhere, their charges are egregious. There's no other adjective I can use other than egregious. 4.5 of the 5 supervisors go elsewhere to get diagnostic testing done, even myself sitting here, because the charges for their outpatient, if you have commercial insurance, their prices are significantly higher than anywhere else. If you're a working class person, you can save a month's salary by picking up and going somewhere else to have an MRI done or a CAT scan performed. $500 or $1,000, that's a lot of money.
Absolutely.
There's they come up with all kinds of excuses why they have to do it. But at the end of the day, what it is, it's cost split, cost sharing, to make up for indigent care, no pay. They take the people that have commercial insurance and they rake them over the coals and try to get out of those. But what happens is, just like our tax base is getting smaller, at the same time, and not surprisingly, the people with commercial insurance is getting smaller. Right. The amount of people that you can gouge is smaller, and the prices stay up, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Eventually, you're going to have nobody here who has commercial insurance. It's just going to be self-pay, Medicaid, and Medicare. And along with that, you see a flight of physicians, because physicians can only make a living in any marketplace, whether it be before the Affordable Care Act or after the Affordable Care Act, if they have a reasonable mix in their payer mix. Right. All the doctors in town do a tremendous amount of pro bono work. We enjoy taking care of patients. We'll take care of as many patients as we can for free, and we need to, within reason. But we have to pay our mortgages. We have to pay our staff. We can't do it with all no-pay patients. So our partner, the hospital, has single-handedly driven a lot of those patients away with their egregious charges. And when you talk to them, it's basically non-negotiable. Yeah. CEO after CEO, CFO after CFO, whether it was HMA and now Community Health following them, as soon as you bring up the word charge master and charge, that's the way it's got to be. First, it was excused that the charges were tied to certain laws about how your other insurance carriers paid you, Medicaid, and what. But that's changed in the last 2 years. So that excuse is off the board. Believe it or not, as we sit here today, they still won't adjust the charges because they still believe they can make up their losses on self-pay and Medicaid patients by overcharging the patients that have insurance. I mean, I can give you some of the most obscene examples. A lady that worked for the county was seen in the ER. I think her bill was $10,000 or $12,000 for a visit that should have been much cheaper, but she ended up getting an injection of an antibiotic that she really didn't even need.
Yeah.
That's not what she went in for. I can go to the drugstore here in town. My retail cost in that drug was $44. I could give it to you, have one of my nurses give it to you, double the cost, still make a $50 profit, and we both would be happy. That's not how they do it. That same drug, they charge this woman $850 for the drug.
Wow.
And I'm not done. And $250 for the privilege of having a nurse inject it. $1,100 for an antibiotic for a patient seen in an emergency room that never even needed the drug.
Wow. Well, what can the county supervisors do? I mean, if ultimately the county still owns that building.
We can make one more concerted effort to try to negotiate with these folks, which is very difficult because it's like negotiating with this proverbial 600-pound gorilla. I mean, to show you how difficult it is, you'll recall about 18 months ago, Blue Cross and Blue Shield threw them out of network.
Right.
Now, that's an 800-pound gorilla.
Yeah.
They couldn't negotiate with them.
Well,
Matter of fact,
something.
that says something. So you can imagine if Blue Cross and Blue Shield didn't have the leverage to try to negotiate with them, at least initially. It turned out in the end they sure did. But initially, HMA was willing to litigate with them. Matter of fact, they're the ones that sued Blue Cross and Blue Shield.
Really?
And that's when Blue Cross and Blue Shield, surprisingly, not surprising to us, any reasonable person, but HMA couldn't understand why, they threw them out of network.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to do with business on somebody suing me.
No.
That's not a collegial relationship that's commercially to anybody's advantage.
Right.
And even the governor tried to get involved, if you recall, at that point
Yeah.
in time. We won't get into try to stay out of politics of why he
Right.
did that. Long story short, eventually the suit was dropped. No monies were. HMA did not get the money they thought they should get from Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and they're still doing business together. But to get back to your question, what can the county do? Very difficult for a small county with a limited budget to litigate.
Right.
We looked at that when the lease was up, and we knew that community health was coming in. We hired Phelps Dunbar. We took a long look at the lease, and we made a decision at that point not to litigate. We did not want community health in here. We thought it was going to be more of the same,
Right.
but we made an informed decision with very good medical healthcare counsel, not the way to go. But we left the door open. At the end of the day, if we feel there are material breaches, and the operative word is material, breaches of that lease, and we feel that we're, if not material breaches yet, we're getting real close to that threshold,
Right.
we're going to look for other opportunities. And I promise you, we've been approached more than once by other folks that want to manage the hospital in a different fashion. And if we can do that without millions of dollars of litigation and believe it's in the best interest of the community, that's certainly something we would do tomorrow. Because at the end of the day, there's so many factors involved with that hospital. The first one is the people around here are entitled to quality health care. The second thing is when I came to town, it was the largest employer in Coahoma County. I think it's lost that distinction from layoffs over the years and the downward utilization of the hospital. I think the community college now is number one, and the hospital is number two. The third thing is the indirect effect on economic development. I don't care who's elected to the Board of Supervisors. I don't care who's sitting in City Hall. If you do not have a functioning, quality hospital, economic development is dead on arrival. An old medical term. DOA, dead on arrival. Nobody's going to bring an industry, a big industry, to this town that doesn't have three things. Right now, we don't have any of the three things, what I call the triad of success. A good educational system, a secure environment, and a good hospital, a quality hospital.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. And when you made in your remarks at a meeting a few weeks ago about it being one of the primary economic engines of the town, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And we appreciate you taking time to talk to us today. And
You're
we're
welcome.
going to come back and talk about the other two pieces of that triad at a later date.
Sure.
But thanks for kind of filling us in on your views about the hospital, and we'll keep an eye on things as they develop.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you very much.